Hey guys, Will here. So today we're taking a look at what is undoubtedly one of the coolest pieces of sim racing hardware available on the market today. This is the SimLab Mercedes-AMG PETRONAS Formula 1 Team Sim Racing Steering Wheel 2024. Now, as you can see here, it looks pretty much exactly the same as what you would find in the real life Formula 1 car. And believe it or not only is this wheel designed using the official Mercedes Formula 1 Team CAD data, but a lot of the components you find inside the wheel are actually identical to what you would find in the real life Formula 1 car. So an absolutely incredible piece of sim racing hardware, and I've got to say an incredible achievement for a relatively small sim racing company as well to pull something like this off. But of course it does come with an absolutely incredible price tag as well. So I think there's going to be two types of people that will be watching today's video: those who are genuinely interested in buying one of these, and we're going to have you guys covered in today's video, of course. But I think the majority of you guys watching today are probably just interested in what something like this actually brings to the table in terms of sim racing. So let's dive into this absolutely crazy wheel and see exactly what it's all about. Let's go. So firstly, big thank you to SimLab for sending across this wheel for us to check out today. Now, as is always the case here at Boosted Media, we'll be cross-comparing against a couple of other wheels in today's video as well. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time doing that today simply because this wheel is so much more expensive than a lot of other wheels that are more suited to general sim racing. This obviously is a very niche product that is suited to a very specific type of person, but it is important that you guys know all the other wheels that you'll be seeing in today's video were all sent to us under the exact same conditions. If you do want to pick up any of the wheels that you see in today's video, we do have some affiliate links and discount codes available down in the description box below. So if you do decide you want to pick up one of these wheels, one of the other wheels you see in today's video, or any other sim racing gear for that matter, that is an awesome way of helping support the channel, potentially saving yourself a little bit of money in the process. And yeah, we really appreciate your support there. You're going to be wanting to sit down for this one because this is an extremely expensive wheel. In fact, it's actually the second most expensive single piece of equipment that we've ever reviewed here at Boosted Media, only surpassed by the SimiCube 2 Ultimate wheelbase. So the pricing for this guy is $2,499 US dollars, 2,654.39 euro, or 4,499 Australian dollars. Now, obviously, you need to factor in various local taxes, shipping costs, import duties on top of that as well, potentially. So make sure you do your research there. So obviously they're backing themselves into an extremely small niche by pricing it this way. But look, the design philosophy here, as will become obvious throughout today's video, is, you know, they've tried to make this thing as awesome as they possibly can. And then the price at the end of the day just ends up being the price, whatever it is. It's not really built to a specific price point like most mainstream sim racing hardware would be. So to put that into perspective for you, that's getting close to double the price of something like the McLaren Artura wheel that we looked at recently. Wheels like the FPE V2 and Hyper P1 from Gomez aren't much more than half the price of this guy, and we will be reviewing these wheels very soon here on the channel, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the reviews of both of those. Even the Fanatec M4 GT3 wheel, which if you've seen our full review of this particular wheel would know, this is the actual homologated steering wheel that you would find in the real life race car. Even this is a lot cheaper than what you're paying for this guy. Now, this is a bit of an interesting comparison because, as you guys would know if you've seen our full review, this is somewhat limited in its functionality for sim racing specifically. A lot of these other wheels that we've looked at just now are more suited to general sim racing. So they've got a lot of features on them that you'll find useful across the board for driving pretty much any car, whereas the feature set of this wheel is a lot more specific. So I think it's fair to sort of start this review off by saying that, you know, to me, this isn't a first wheel or maybe even a second wheel that you would own. I generally say, you know, the first wheel that you would probably own is going to be a round wheel because it's going to be the most versatile. The second wheel might be a, you know, a butterfly style wheel like this. And for that second wheel, you're generally going to be wanting to go for something that is generic as possible with that kind of ergonomic style. So something that you can use in pretty much any car that you're going to be driving that you want those kinds of ergonomics. And after those two bases are covered, that's generally when you're going to start getting into the more specialized stuff. So something that's designed for one particular style of car. Now, that said, the ergonomics of this wheel are absolutely fantastic. So there's no real reason why, ergonomically at least, you couldn't use this wheel for a lot of other types of cars. But as you can see here, being visually identical to what you would find in the real life Formula 1 car does mean that there are a couple of handy features that you won't find on this wheel that you would find on more generic wheels. So now that you've got a better picture of exactly who this wheel is intended for, let's dive into exactly what you are getting for the money. So as this really cool holographic sticker on the back of the wheel signifies, this is an officially licensed product. And what that means in a practical sense is absolutely meticulous attention to detail when it comes to the design of this thing and trying to make it as close as possible to the real life F1 wheel. So they've used the official CAD data for the real life wheel to create the structure and the shell that you see here. And in fact, the 9 Greyhill brand rotary switches that you'll find on this wheel are the exact same switches that you'll find in the real life counterpart. So that is pretty darn cool. What you're feeling when you flick those switches is literally identical to what the real life F1 drivers feel. So it is a full handmade carbon fiber shell, and because of that, there are a few little imperfections here and there in the carbon fiber weave, but certainly on this full production wheel that we have here today and the early production wheel that we had our hands on a little while ago, there was nothing major to be found here. In fact, the only real imperfection that I found on this particular wheel is just a little bit of a dodgy weave here right on the very corner, which you probably can't even really see on camera. But look, anybody that has experience with real life race car parts would know that us sim racers tend to be extremely fussy when it comes to these finer details. Real life race car wheels are pretty janky. They are designed to be as light as possible, and they do forego a lot of the refinement because of that. You know, anybody that's had any sort of carbon fiber parts on their car as well would know that it is very rarely absolutely perfect. So certainly nothing to complain about here. And the only other imperfection that I've found on either wheel that we've had our hands on is just a little bit of glue seepage around the tops of the hand grips and a little bit of a rough edge. So whether or not that's something that bothers you at this kind of price point, I'll leave up to you guys. Look, for me, honestly, I'm in two minds about it. I was a little bit disappointed when I saw it, but then again, compared to what you would find in a real life race car, as I said before, you're gonna find those kinds of things anyway. So in terms of other key specs here, 280 millimeter diameter, which is exactly the same as what you'll find in the real life Formula One car. So I do generally say that somewhere between 280 and 300 millimeters tends to be the sweet spot for most people when it comes to a wheel of this style. Anything bigger than about 300 millimeters and it can start to feel a little bit lazy and awkward, can also have a damping effect on your force feedback as well. Anything smaller than about 280 millimeters can start to feel a little bit twitchy and a little bit overreactive, I guess you could say. So look, basically the smaller the diameter, the more responsive the force feedback is going to feel overall. The larger you go to, the more dampened it's going to feel overall. But look, the majority of people that are actually going to be buying one of these wheels probably have a really high-end wheelbase with plenty of dynamic range anyway. So I don't really think that's going to be a major concern to anybody. And of course, you would hope that the F1 engineers that designed this wheel would know what they were doing. So I'm certainly nobody to judge their choices there. But yeah, I guess the point is here, if you are looking at using this wheel to drive a variety of different styles of cars, you're going to be absolutely fine from anything from Formula style all the way through to GT3, GT4, and so forth. So no concerns there. Weight of the wheel comes in at 1,129 grams or 1,240 grams, including the hub on the back, which you'll see in just a minute. So definitely on the lighter side when it comes to wheels of this kind of feature set. So while we have tested a couple of other wheels like the Rexing My RS2, which we reviewed just recently on the channel, which do come in at a similar weight, more typically you're looking at around sort of 1.6 to 1.9 kilograms for a wheel of this kind of style with this kind of feature set. So definitely on the more lightweight side. And that reduction in weight certainly doesn't come at the cost of any loss of rigidity at all. This thing is absolutely rock solid, as you would expect, with no meaningful flex anywhere on the wheel at all. So yeah, no complaints there whatsoever. Very, very solid piece of kit. So then we get into the hand grips, and we already mentioned the slight imperfections around the top where the glue is leaking just a little bit on this particular example, but these are an anti-static silicone material. It is that same kind of sticky material that I'm not a massive fan of if you've watched any of my recent wheel reviews. But look, I mean, obviously it's, you know, it's very similar, if not the same as what they're using in the real life Formula One cars. So, you know, I'm not really in a position to complain about it, but just so that you guys are aware, if you are driving with bare hands, it does tend to feel a little bit clammy and sticky when your hands start to get a little bit sweaty. It does tend to be a dirt and debris magnet as well. You can see there is a little bit of pickup here off my hands, even after I've done my absolute best to clean this for the videos. So yeah, if that's something that bothers you, you know, it is what it is. But I think it's pretty fair to say that anybody that's going to be buying one of these wheels is likely going to be using gloves anyway. And the stiffness of the rotary switches, as we'll see a little bit later on, does lend itself to the use of gloves anyway. So yeah, not a deal breaker in this context. There is just a little bit of squishiness there inherent in the silicone itself. One thing that I do always test for these open style wheels now is that the grips themselves are nice and solid in the bottom. Now there is a little bit of squishy just down the bottom here. As you can see, the grip does tend to move around just at the very bottom here. Hopefully you guys can see that okay on camera. And I am just a little bit concerned that if you do have a tendency to really push in on the bottom of the wheel over time, you may actually wear through that silicone. You can actually feel the carbon fiber shell of the wheel underneath that kind of pushing against the rubber. So a little bit concerned about that. Obviously, we'll just have to see how it stands the test of time. But one of the complaints that we had about the RSR wheel from Grid Engineering is that the bottoms of the grips here actually feel like they twist quite a bit. So when you get into the wheel and you really kind of twist your hands, and you have to put quite a bit of force into it, but a lot of people do tend to push on the wheel as they're steering. There was quite a bit of twist in those grips. Happy to report that in the case of this particular wheel, the shell itself is extremely solid. So you don't get any sensation of twist in the wheel at all. It is just literally that silicone kind of bending around the shell of the wheel right at the very bottom. So it's not a issue ergonomically at all, but we may, with heavy use, start to see some wear and tear and even some splitting in that silicon around the bottom there. So we're just gonna have to keep an eye on that. But ergonomically, as you'll see later on, this wheel is absolutely beautiful. So let's continue on the face of the wheel now and talk about this dash. So a couple of interesting things here. A lot of sim racing wheels that we've tested over the years are using Vocore displays, which do have a tendency to be quite sensitive when it comes to voltage and bandwidth. So we've seen quite a few examples over the years where screens have glitched out if you've got a lot of other things connected to the same hub, or if you try to run them without a power injector. So the screen that you'll find in this particular wheel, and they tell me all other SimLab wheels moving forward, are actually using their own proprietary design. Now, obviously they're not designing the panel themselves, but the driver board, from what I understand, is all their own design. So what that means in a practical sense is that you should find this screen to be more reliable. They don't actually require the use of a power injector anymore like they do on a lot of their other wheels. Although if you do own other Grid Engineering or SimLab wheels that use that Lumberg 6-pin connector, you can actually connect this wheel directly to that same connection and forego a separate connection to your PC. So that is an option for you as well. But they do actually include a nice long braided cable which allows you to connect the wheel directly back to your PC. And yeah, happy to report that we haven't had any issues at all with dropouts or any kind of glitchiness on the screen at all, other than just a couple of little software glitches, which I will cover a little bit later on. Now, the other advantage of this display, although admittedly it's not something that I actually noticed without them telling me, is it is slightly brighter than what you would find in a typical Vocore display as well. So they told me that typical Vocore comes in at 350 lumens. This guy is 400 lumens. So if you do like to have a really bright dash, then that's something that you might appreciate. But it's a diameter of 4.3 inches with a resolution of 480 by 800. So pretty typical. And look, I didn't have any problems reading relatively fine text on this. Now, it is fully compatible with SimHub, which means you can run any dash you want, but we will talk about the dashes that they include with the wheel specifically when we get into the software and feature set in more detail in just a moment. So that is a quick rundown on the dash. You can see surrounding the dash is an array of 25 RGB LEDs as well. You can see 2 on either side up here in the hand grips, 3 flag LEDs on either side, and then a rev strip along the top here with 15 LEDs. Now, these are fully customizable through SimHub, but they do include some profiles which do a pretty good job at matching the RPMs to what you would find in the real life cars for most of the types of cars that you're likely to be driving this. Of course, there will be cases where you will need to just fine tune this to match the car that you're driving. But if you're jumping into Assetto Corsa, iRacing or F1 24, and you can of course use these LEDs on the side to indicate things like spotters. So if there's a car next to you, it will light up on either side. Marshal flags, of course, as well are covered. And then more specialized things like activation of DRS, fuel indicator lights, all those kind of, basically all the things that you find on the real life F1 car are also replicated here through the profiles that they include both in Race Director and through SimHub. So they've done a really nice job there. It was a little bit sketchy at first when we first started testing this out, but after a little bit of pressure while we were testing one of their early production wheels, they have now cleaned all of that up, and yeah, absolutely no issues with the experience there, in my experience at least, whatsoever. Now, just to finish up on the dash and LEDs from a hardware perspective here, you can see it does have this really nice clean inlay here. This is what they describe as a silk screen scratch resistant glass. So really happy to see that. A lot of other wheels that we see come through here do just have an exposed LCD, which of course is vulnerable to micro scratches when you're cleaning it and things like that. So definitely a good thing, I think, at least, to have a little bit of protection there. And then we move on into our buttons. So let's talk about the 12 buttons that we have on the face of the wheel first. We'll get into the rotary encoders and we'll flip the wheel around and talk about shifters and the additional buttons on the back as well. So unlike the rotary switches, the push buttons aren't exactly the same as what you would find in the real life F1 car. Not sure exactly what the reason is for that. But look, that said, they do have a nice activation to them. They're not what I would describe as the best feeling buttons that I've ever felt on a sim racing wheel, but I wouldn't say that I'm disappointed with them either. You know, they have a nice snap to them. There's no sort of squish at all. So they are very tactile, very solid click. Not a whole lot of movement. They're probably only about 1 millimeter of movement when you push the buttons down. And yeah, snappy enough that even with gloves on, you do still feel a nice positive click when you push those down. The buttons themselves aren't backlit, unlike a lot of other sim racing wheels that we do see these days. But of course, being modeled off the real life car, which doesn't have backlit buttons, it makes sense that this doesn't have either. So I don't think anybody's going to be upset about that. But of course, if you are shopping for a more general sim racing wheel, that is something that is worth considering. A lot of the wheels that we see these days do have some really cool features with relation to those buttons. So not only can they respond and flash or change color when you push a button, but they can also be used for things like spotters. So in addition to the LEDs around the wheel, you can have them light up and, you know, communicate what's going on track or around you and so forth. So none of that functionality with the push buttons on this particular wheel. Now, in terms of stickers, the wheel does come pre-populated with some stickers installed. So these indicators here and the ones around the rotary dials on the bottom here were pre-installed. The buttons themselves didn't have any stickers on. They do include a sheet of stickers here, as you can see, both light and dark. Now, one thing that I did find a little bit of a struggle, maybe it's just my colorblind eyes, but the white stickers against the white background, it was very difficult to see what they actually were. So I kind of had to hold them up against a light source to see through them and identify which one was which. In terms of installation, no major issues there. They are nice, high quality stickers. They do include a nice little set of plastic tweezers as well to make installation a little bit easier. There's no little recess in the buttons to help you locate the stickers. And again, we will just have to see whether they stand the test of time in terms of sliding around on the button faces. One thing I will mention here is that it is very important that you get the stickers aligned correctly when you install them. Some other sim racing wheels, if you put it on a little bit crooked, you can actually rotate the dial and straighten it up. But these buttons do appear to be keyed in some way. So if you get it crooked, you are going to have to peel it off and try again. Now, they do include an assortment of other stickers as well if you want to get crazy. So you can see here some replacements for the stickers here, a whole bunch of other labels here which you can stick on in various different places. Again, we just went with what they had in their photos, which I believe matches Lewis Hamilton's wheel. And then they also include a couple of different sticker sets here which you can use to replace down the bottom. Now, if you're an avid F1 fan, you might know that the configuration that Lewis Hamilton has with this wheel is slightly different to what George Russell drives with, and that is in relation to these three dials down the bottom here. So this is the Lewis Hamilton configuration as it comes out of the box. They do also include a George Russell spec knob here to replace that center dial, as well as those stickers that we saw just before. So that is a really nice touch. And again, the attention to detail there is absolutely insane. One of the things that they told me was that they ran a batch of these switches, and then Mercedes weren't happy that the color wasn't exactly the same as the real life wheel. So they ended up having to go back and try again. So that just gives you a little bit more insight into the meticulous nature of the design of this wheel. So let's talk about these rotary switches now. So as I mentioned a couple of times now, these are Grey Hill brand switches, and they are literally the same switches that you would find in the real life F1 car. So that is really cool. In terms of mechanical feel, obviously, as you would expect, they do have a nice solid click in each position. There's no sort of spring-loaded movement there before it actually activates. So it is a very positive click in each position. Now, the thumb encoders are anodized, whereas the three dials down the bottom here appear to be powder-coated. And they are a little bit on the sharp side. They're not going to tear your fingers up or anything like that. But I think if you were driving for many, many hours without gloves on, you may end up with some blisters or some calluses over time on your fingers. So again, sort of more suited to driving with gloves than bare hands, I would say, which is probably what most people are going to be doing anyway. So not a concern. But yeah, they definitely are a little bit on the stiffer side, which I actually think works quite well because it allows you to feel exactly what's going on. And these can function as both rotary encoders or multi-position switches with a bunch of additional functionality that we'll get into in just a moment. So no complaints with regards to the thumb encoders. They are very conveniently placed on the wheel as well. As you can see in this footage here, as I move my hand around the wheel, very comfortable and very easy to reach every single position of all of these buttons around the side. So ergonomically, really, really clean design, as you would expect, obviously being designed by F1 engineers. So then we get to the three dials down the bottom here, and we'll go through the functionality in just a minute, but just in terms of the mechanical feel, again, very positive click in each position. There's not a meaningful amount of rotation before it snaps into the next position. There is a little bit of movement from side to side, as you can see, certainly nothing to complain about. And again, exactly the same as what you find in the real life F1 car. So who am I to complain, right? But yeah, nice positive click in each position. And as I mentioned before, these are powder coated as opposed to anodized. So plenty of things to go through here on the back of the wheel as well. We'll start at the top and just work our way down here. So we do have two brake magic buttons here, but of course, depending on the car that you're driving, we'll stipulate what you might want to do with those. Interestingly, they do also include a couple of these little shields, and these have little adhesive backings. Now, if you remember back to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in 2021, Lewis Hamilton accidentally bumped his brake magic button, and it ended up being, to say the very least, extremely costly to him. So the team actually ended up implementing these little shields over the buttons after that incident. So you can stick these onto the wheel if you want to on both sides, and they literally just go over the top like that, just to avoid accidentally bumping that button. So it's a much more intentional movement. You actually have to kind of curl your finger around to get to the button, but I'm absolutely fine not running them because I'm not assigning them to anything absolutely mission critical. So that is the two brake magic buttons. So then we move down to the shifter, which has this rocker action like this, very similar to what we find on the Fanatec McLaren GT3 wheel and the Thrustmaster Ferrari SF1000 wheel, if you've seen those reviews. So full carbon fiber armature here again, so no meaningful flex or anything like that. Even if I pull down really hard on both paddles, no flex there really to speak of whatsoever. Little tiny bit of side to side movement that I did notice, but certainly nothing that impacts the driving experience. And yeah, literally you pull on one side to shift up, pull on the other side to shift down, and you can also push on either side as well if you wish to do it that way. So if you want to just shift with one hand, you can go up shift, down shift, or up shift, down shift with your left hand if you wanted to do that. So it is a relatively short throw there. You can see probably about 10 millimeters of travel, and it has an activation force, in case you're wondering, of 900 grams. So it's not super stiff. You can actually make some adjustment to that as well. So what you can do is loosen the 2 set screws here and then remove the 4 bolts holding it in place. You can actually remove that entire assembly, and underneath there, you'll find 2 little magnets that look very similar to these guys. And you can actually rotate those around. You can flip them around to either increase or decrease the activation force required. And then they also include 2 additional magnets, which is what these are here, to adjust it even further again if you wish to do so. So nice little inclusion there. Look, honestly, I was absolutely happy and satisfied with the factory default setting, so I just didn't feel any need to change it whatsoever. But yeah, if your personal preference is for something different, then they have you covered there. Relatively quiet activation as well. Not the quietest shifter that I've ever driven with, but certainly nowhere near the loudest either. If I just quickly grab the McLaren Artura wheel again, which is one of the louder wheels on the market, and you can hear compared to, so quite a bit quieter there for those who that might be important to. With the small magnet with a thick pad, you're looking at an activation force of just a touch over 200 grams, and then it goes all the way up to the 900 grams, which is the default setting. So then we move down to the clutch, which is definitely one of the more interesting clutches we've seen on a sim racing wheel. Now, for those who might not be familiar with the Formula One regulations, the way I understand it at least, and feel free to correct me in the comments down below, is that it is, for the most part at least, a relatively manual process. They're not allowed to have any sort of automatic clutch. They do have anti-stall, of course, but that's a separate process, just stops the engine from stalling. Doesn't actually allow them to automatically get the car underway or do any sort of automatic rev matching or anything like that, as far as I'm aware. So the way this works is literally you just pull it like so to release or engage the clutch, and it's got these 2 finger grooves here to ensure that your fingers don't slip out. So when you're driving normally, it is for the most part completely out of the way. You can see it doesn't interfere with my fingers for shifting or anything like that. Now, I did ask, are you able to invert this? Unfortunately, the answer to that question is no. So it is going to be right hand activation only. There are a couple of different modes included on the wheel as well, which we'll go through when we get into the software in just a moment. So you can actually set this as a bite point clutch as well as just a standard analog axis. So you do have those 2 options. Now, in terms of adjustment, we do have a little bit of adjustability available here. So let me just quickly grab the included Allen key, which is here. And there's a little tiny set screw just inside here. What we can do is we can wind that in or out. They say to take a little bit of tension off it. You can wind that out, and you can see that does increase the throw. So in the fully loosened position, you've got a good probably 3 inches of travel there, I would say, which is a huge amount. And it does have quite a progressive feel to it as well. So it does sort of get stiffer the further you pull it in, rather than being a linear action all the way through. So that does allow you to establish muscle memory with a little bit more precision there. And then we can also wind that in as well. So wind it to the fully in position as well. So we'll just wind that set screw in. And you can see in this one, not that you would ever want to have it this far in, but very, very short throw there. Now, one thing I did notice is that within the first sort of 20 to 30% of the activation, there is quite a bit of flickering in the signal. I did email them about that, and they said that they were aware of it. It's something that they are looking at trying to fix. But look, it doesn't, for the most part, impact the driving experience, at least in my experience. But if they can, definitely something that they should be looking at trying to filter out so that doesn't occur for other people. So I'll just quickly adjust that clutch back to its default position, and you can see again just how easy this is. Turn it around this way again so you guys can see. They do say to put a little bit of tension on it just to avoid wear and tear, but for the sake of the video, you can see how it adjusts like so. So about there is probably good for me, I think. And we're back to how we were. Obviously, we just need to run through a calibration process again, which I'll show you in just a minute. So that is the clutch. A couple more things just to quickly cover off on the back of the wheel here. You can see the 6-pin Lumberg connection for connecting back to your PC via the included USB cable, which looks like this, so pretty standard cable. We did mention before, but I'll mention again quickly, there isn't a power injector included with this wheel. You can use it with the existing power injector from any of your other Grid Engineering or SimLab wheels, but you don't actually need to use it because of the changes they've made to the display. So they do include that extension cable that we looked at before, as well as the Lumberg connection. So pretty standard connection here. You see here it does actually screw into the base as well, so there's no chance of that becoming disconnected by accident while you're driving. So that is all well and good. Now, if you've got a keen eye, you may have also noticed a little pin header on the inside inside of the hub here. So you do have the option to connect the wheel internally to a quick release adapter. Now they didn't include a cable to plug into this, so I'm assuming it must be some sort of optional accessory depending on the quick release that you want to use it with. But what you basically do is you can unscrew the lumbar connection here, then there's a little cable that you need to reconnect internally here, and then they actually include inside the packaging a little cover which looks like this guy here. And that basically just covers that little port so that it's completely clean on the back here, and all of those connections are internal. So if you've got a compatible setup and you want to reduce the clutter on the back of the wheel, get rid of all the cables entirely, then that is an option as well. Now the hub itself, it is completely solid. As I mentioned before, there's no meaningful flex here whatsoever, which I was really happy to see. It does push your quick release adapter 95 millimeters off the back of the wheel though. So just be aware of that. If you are interchanging between a bunch of different wheels, if we pull up the McLaren Artura wheel again, you can see the quick release hub in this particular scenario actually bolts directly to the back of the wheel. So you can imagine if we sit them side by side here and we were interchanging between the two, that is the difference in distance between where your hands would be with this wheel compared to this wheel. So again, just something to be mindful of there. A lot of wheels do have a hub like this. It's more common to have something like this than to not have it. So for example, you can see the GSI one here as well, which you can actually remove provided you've got a quick release. It isn't going to interfere with the paddles on the back. But yeah, every wheel is going to be different there. Just something to be aware of. You've got a standard 70 millimeter PCD here with threaded holes, only 3 of them as opposed to the 6 that you find on a lot of others. But again, absolutely no meaningful flex here whatsoever. So they do include a little bag of nuts and bolts to get you up and running, and you can mount, of course, whatever wheel side quick release you want. The zero play quick release, which they also sell, they bought this design from Hybrid Racing Simulations here in Australia, and I've been using these quick releases for a very long time now. So you can just bolt that on like so, bolt straight on the back there, nice and easy, and you are up and running. So that's everything you need to see on the back of the wheel. Any questions, let us know. But let's get this hooked back up to the PC now and run you through some of the more intricate features. A couple of important things to understand here straight off the bat. You can use this wheel through SimHub. You can also use it through their Race Director software, and they do rely on Race Director, at least to some extent, to manage a lot of the functionality built into this wheel. Now that's different from some of the other sim racing wheels that we've reviewed recently, particularly if we go back to the Rexing Myris 2 wheel. Most of the core functionality, if not all of the functionality on this wheel, is actually manageable through the wheel itself using the inbuilt displays without needing to rely on any third-party software to actually make adjustments and so forth. And in a similar way, but not exactly the same, on the Solpec Spectra XR wheel, which we also reviewed recently, there's a SimHub plugin for this wheel that allows you to manage a lot of those same functions through SimHub rather than through the wheel itself. So just a couple of different approaches to that deeper level of functionality. So this wheel is a lot more similar in its implementation to something like the Artura wheel from Asher Racing, which we looked at recently, which makes use of their software to manage a lot of the functionality. So the key takeaway there is that rather than having processing on board on the wheel that manages those functions or managing it through SimHub, you're actually managing it through their own software. So that has a couple of advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage being that in a couple of scenarios, you will need to Alt-Tab out of your game to go into the Race Director software and make those adjustments. Whereas on the Solpec wheel, you can make those adjustments and see the change on the dash, and it sort of just operates in SimHub in the background. On the Myris 2 wheel, because you're using the processing actually on board on the wheel, is making those adjustments on the wheel itself rather than through software. So hopefully that makes sense. It'll make a lot more sense as we go through this functionality. So in terms of software, you have compatibility with SimHub. You can run your dash, your LEDs, and all your profiles for those things through SimHub completely natively. You don't have to use Race Hub for any of that stuff, but you do have the option of using that as well. And that's one of the things that I've called out in a lot of review videos recently. SimHub is obviously an amazing piece of software. I think it's absolutely incredible what the developer's been able to achieve. But in saying that, I'm not 100% comfortable with manufacturers relying on third-party software just to give you the core functionality of their own product. I think that it's a lot safer if they have their own software. That way, you know, if some sort of third-party relationship breaks down or there's some sort of issue that's outside of their control, you're not going to end up with an expensive paperweight. So that's the advantage. And the wheels that I personally like best and I think make the most sense are the ones that give you the option of using that third-party software, but also have their own software which you can use just like what we have here. So I think overall it's a pretty good choice. Let's take you through that Race Director software quickly now so you get an idea of the functionality that's available here. Then we'll take a quick look at SimHub as well. So this is the Race Director software. If you've seen any of our recent Grid Engineering or SimLab wheel reviews or our SimLab pedal review, you'd be familiar with this. All of their various different hardware peripherals all show up in this same piece of software, just the same as what we see within most sim racing ecosystems these days. So this is no no different. So with our wheel connected to the PC, we've got a couple of different tabs across the top here. We've got controller settings, we've got display settings pertaining to the dash, we've got LED settings here pertaining, of course, to the RGB LEDs, which we've already talked about. We then have a support tab where you can download latest versions, get in contact and download the manual, and a tab for updating the firmware. Very easy process. You just download a firmware file and you can flash it from here. Absolutely no drama whatsoever. So you've got a couple of different modes available for the wheel. You've got a simple mode, and as you can see in the graphic here, this configures the wheel so that all the rotary dials behave as rotary encoders. So basically, one movement upwards is up, one movement downwards is down, and it doesn't have any smarts that allow it to know what physical position it's in. So you can imagine if you jump inside a game and you adjust your engine map, you then go out of the game, leave the switch in that position. The next time you go back into the game, it's going to think that position 7, for example, is position 1. It doesn't have any sort of feedback loop, I guess you could say. Now, the advantage of that is that it's compatible with pretty much every single racing game or sim racing title out there. The alternative to that is multi-position switch mode, which knows what position it's in. So the position that you have the switch in will always correlate with the same setting inside the game. Disadvantage being that not every single sim racing title is going to be compatible with that mode. So good wheels will always have the option to use either, and that is exactly what we have here. So in simple mode, the dials work as rotary encoders and all the push buttons just work as push buttons, and it's as simple as that. The dash and the LEDs are all configured through the profiles, which you'll see in just a minute. It's also important to note that in simple mode, the bite point clutch option isn't available, so it does just operate as an analog axis. As you can see, that little red bar down the bottom there. And just to quickly demonstrate as well that flickering that I was talking about, you can see when I first pull in the lever just a little bit, you can see how that is flickering away there. But once you get up higher in the activation, it doesn't do it. So typical scenario, you would be releasing the clutch around the sort of 70 to 80 mark and then doing a pretty linear release there. But just so you can see, that's what it does. So now if we switch into expert mode, you can now see we've got a couple of adjustments here that we didn't have before. So we've got our bite point adjustment, and this gives us an easy way to adjust the bite point from within the software itself. So in expert mode, with this center dial adjusted to the bite position, you can see these LEDs activate. And now when we pull in the clutch just by itself, you can see the activation is only going to 50%. If we then hold the N button here, you can see it jumps to 100%. So in a typical race scenario, what you would do is on the start line, you would hold the clutch in, hold the N button. You would then, when the lights go green, release the N button. That's going to take you to your bite point and then release the clutch from there. So very simple to do. Now we can also adjust that bite point from the wheel itself. Now we've seen a couple of other wheels have different interesting ways of doing this. Some of them display the adjustment on the display itself or flash up the LEDs so that you get a visual representation of what your percentage is. The way they've done it on this wheel is actually really simple and really effective. So what you do is with the bite selection made on our center dial here, so position 2, we press and hold down our button here. And then the numbers on these thumb encoders correlate with the percentage. So if you go 5 and then 2, your bite point would be set to 52%, as you can see on the screen there. If we go, say, 7 and 1, our bite point is now set to 71%, as you can again see in the software. Once you've made that adjustment, you just release that button, and then our thumb encoders can be mapped in their standard way. So that is how you adjust the bite point. You can then, from the software, choose whether you want to use each one of these thumb encoders as a multi-position switch or a rotary encoder, as we described before, with the advantages and disadvantages that we also discussed before. So the way you would do that is quite simply just click on each one, and then you can choose whether you want to have simple mode, which is just plus and minus, as you see here, or positional mode, which you can see then the number on the dial correlates with the actual signal that it'll be outputting. So number 1 will always be position 1 and so forth. So lots of versatility there in terms of configuration. You'll notice that in expert mode, that center dial doesn't have the ability to change the modes, whereas in simple mode, it did just operate as a plus and minus rotary encoder. So in expert mode, this dial effectively becomes like a selection knob for the various different software features of the wheel itself, rather than something that's controlling the game, if that makes sense. So of course, all of these modes are described in detail in their product manual. So if you are looking at buying one of these wheels, I would definitely recommend download that manual, run yourself through it. That's going to give you a much deeper understanding of exactly how all this stuff works than what we're going to cover in today's video. But I will just give you a quick overview of all the various different modes so you get a general understanding of what this wheel can do. So position 1 here is marked as DEF. This is just default. What that means is that in this position, all the buttons just operate as they're mapped inside your game. Position 2, we already talked about, that is our bite point adjustment mode. If we then spin all the way around to position number 9, which enables a special practice mode, which basically uses the RPM strip at the top of the wheel to simulate the Christmas tree or the starting lights. You then release the clutch as you would in a real race, and it gives you a display at the end that gives you readings on your reaction time and so forth. And unfortunately, the feature isn't fully implemented at the time that we're making this video, but hopefully by the time you guys get your hands on the wheels, it will be. But just to give you a basic idea here, we pull the clutch to 100%, press our Mark PC button here, or whichever button you assign it to, and you can see the LEDs across the top light up and then release. And obviously when they release would be when you would release the clutch. So it's not going to give us the readout, but you can imagine I release the clutch and it would give us a display like what you see in the instruction manual here. So that's a quick rundown on the practice start mode. Bit of a gimmick, I'll be honest with you guys, but you know, if it's something that is really important to you to practice, then you know, it gives you the option of doing it on the wheel without having to be inside the sim. So position 11 then allows you to adjust the brightness of the LCD screen. So plus turns it up and minus turns it down. Now you can of course adjust this in the software or through SimHub as well if you wish to do so, but it's a nice convenient way to be able to do it from the wheel itself. Position 12, similar idea, but adjusts the brightness of the LEDs. And that is all the various different modes available through this multi-position switch when you're in advanced mode. So let's set it back to position 1 or default mode for now and talk about a couple more things that we can do through the software. So I'm just going to bring up some test data on the screen now so that we can see things operating. Now this dash is running through the Race Director software, so we're not relying on SimHub at all to display this, and that ties into what we were talking about just before. So I'm going to click across now to the display tab. Now by default in the software, you do have the Mercedes-AMG W15 dash, which is what we're seeing now. And that is a replica of the dash that you would find in the real life car. So to just give you a bit more detailed breakdown of exactly what we have available here, the orange number there is our current brake bias, our last lap, our target fuel, our tire temperatures, our brake temperatures, our remaining battery capacity, our water temperature down the bottom there. And then we also have bars on the left and right, which indicate our remaining battery and fuel capacity. So that's a basic rundown here. We can also switch between pages on the dash as well to give us a little bit of additional information too. So depending on the dash will obviously determine how many different pages and the detail that you have there. So if we click on current dash here, you can see there are a selection of different dashes built into the software. And again, this isn't using SimHub at all. This is just dashes that are built into their own software. So there's no need to run any sort of third-party software to do any of this, which is cool. So we then have a tab here for display configuration. That's just going to tell the software which physical dashboard it should be talking to. And then we have controls here that we can map for our next page, previous page for our dashes and our launch practice as we talked about before. So that's everything related to the LCD dash itself within the Race Director software. Now the usefulness of what you actually see on the screen will ultimately be determined by the game that you're running. So say for example, iRacing doesn't output live tire temperatures. So you're not going to see those temperatures update in real time like you will in some other titles. So just be aware of those limitations. If we then click across to the LED tab, pretty self-explanatory here. We can choose between different LED profiles depending on the car that we're driving so that our rev strips match the car that we're driving in reality. And you can see there are a couple of different profiles that are baked in here. We then have the option for adjusting our brightness, our RPM red line flash percentage, and our blinking speed in milliseconds, so how quickly the lights will pulse when the shift light is activated. You can then click on test all LEDs and trigger various different scenarios. So our RPM strip, you can see it goes up and down like that. Now it's not broken. Those LEDs on the left-hand side are usually used in a Formula One car to indicate different things. So you get the idea here. Yellow flag scenario, you can see it lights up, blue flag, and so forth. DRS available and activated as well. So DRS available. And then when we actually activate our DRS, you can see the blue light comes on like so. So all pretty self-explanatory there. And yeah, I think that is everything you need to see in terms of the Race Director software. So just to quickly give you a rundown on SimHub as well. One little annoyance that I did have, and you'll see when I open up SimHub here, because it's also trying to talk to the dash, you'll notice the screen will go absolutely crazy in just a second. Let me just trigger it here. There we go. Yeah, so the screen's going to start going all garbled and crazy. So they haven't built into the Race Director software yet any way of detecting if the screen is already being interfaced with through SimHub or any other third-party software. So it means if you are wanting to have Race Director running in the background to do other things, you will just need to disconnect it from the screen, or vice versa. If you want to run SimHub for other things but don't want to have it operating the screen because you want to use Race Director for that, you will just need to disable the screen. If you've got both trying to talk to it at once, it will go a little bit crazy like you see here. So I'm going to close off Race Director now. I probably will also need to relaunch SimHub just to make it talk properly. So it's a little bit clumsy here. There's a little bit of refinement I think they could make in their software just to make sure that everything is working as cleanly as possible. Let's get it reconnected to the dash now. So you can see it looks exactly the same as it did before, but now that dash is actually being operated by SimHub as well as the LEDs. So there are LED profiles that you can download. I'm not going to run through all of the intricacies of SimHub here because it effectively works the same as any other SimHub compatible wheel. But we can see here, we do have a profile cooked into SimHub for this particular wheel, which will come with default profiles that work for most cars. We can also set up custom LED profiles as well. They do provide one specifically for this wheel that works with the majority of cars that people are likely to be driving this with. And in my experience, I tested with iRacing, F1 24 and Assetto Corsa, and there weren't any issues with the most recent profiles. Some of the early ones were a little bit broken, but does seem to be all okay now. And it'll be interesting to see whether guys like Daniel Newman, for example, come up with their own profiles to do funky things with this as well. We can adjust our brightness through the software here as well. And of course, we can map physical buttons on the wheel to control various different software elements within SimHub as well, just like any other wheel would do. So if we click across to LCD now, SimLab have collaborated with Lovely Racing, who you guys will be familiar with most likely from Lovely Dashboard, to recreate the AMG Mercedes F1 dash on the wheel as well. So through SimHub, you also have the option of a authentic dash. Now, of course, because it is SimHub compatible, we can choose any other dashboard that we might want as well. What I will say is that if you are driving the Mercedes F1 or any other F1 car specifically, this dash actually does work really well, as does the Race Director one, because it gives you a lot of those other little details that might be missing on other more generic dashes. But for general driving, so say you want to drive GT3 or something like that, what I would generally then do is just run the standard Lovely dashboard. I'm going to have to change it here as well. Just click up one, Lovely dashboard, and you can see now it's just going to load into the standard Lovely dashboard. It's probably going to sit there because there isn't a sim running on this machine at the moment. But yeah, you get the idea. You can run any dash that you want. There we go. It's loaded up now. And because all of those advanced functions that we looked at before aren't making use of the dashboard, running different aftermarket dashboards isn't going to limit the functionality in that sense either. So I think that's everything you guys need to know in terms of the hardware and the software. Let's dive in now and talk more about what this thing is actually like to drive with. So in terms of the driving experience, a couple of good things, a couple of not so good things here. So look, ergonomically, and I've already mentioned this a couple of times throughout today's review, this wheel is absolutely outstanding, very comfortable to hold. All the buttons are easily reachable. All the feeling of the buttons is really excellent with or without gloves on. Without gloves, the rotor encoders, the thumb encoders do feel a little bit sharp, but as I've said a couple of times now, I think the majority of people are going to be driving with gloves on a wheel like this anyway. So certainly nothing to complain about. And I wouldn't have expected to have anything to complain about a wheel that was designed by an F1 team. You know, obviously they're going to nail it. So look, there isn't really a whole lot there in terms of just the general driving experience. The rocker switch that we have for the shifter paddles, you know, that's going to take a little bit of getting used to some people. It does have the advantage of being able to push or pull in either direction to upshift or downshift, so that is quite cool. It is quite narrow, as you guys saw before, so it is something that you're only going to be operating with your index fingers. I do on a lot of wheels shift with both fingers, or sometimes even just my middle fingers or even bottom fingers sometimes, depending on the wheel. So it did sort of feel a little bit unnatural to me for a couple of days when I first started using the wheel, but I adjusted to it relatively quickly, and that was absolutely fine. And overall, just a very comfortable wheel to drive with. Now, it might sound silly, but another thing that I've really appreciated about using this wheel is that it doesn't have any branding on it anywhere. Now, of course, there are the stickers on it, which, you know, are authentic to what the real life Formula One car has, but literally the only SimLab branding is just this one little sticker that you can peel off right on the bottom here where you never see it. And you know, I just really like that. One of the things that I hate about pretty much every sim racing wheel that's out there on the market at the moment is everything has logos on it everywhere. I mean, you know, Solpec has a big Solpec logo down here. Rexing has their logo. I mean, this one isn't too bad, but again, you've got a Rexing logo down there. The McLaren Artura wheels, you've got a massive Asher Racing logo on the top here, and the McLaren logo on the front here, Asher Racing again here. You know, having the McLaren logo there just means that if you're driving anything else, it kind of just doesn't really stack up. And I know they do have some plans around that, so stay tuned for more information on that as well. And then Gomez as well. I mean, you know, you've got a GSI logo here, GSI logo there, Hyper P1 there, GSI logo on the funky switch. Like, it's just, I get why they do it, but how clean is this? I mean, just how nice does that look? But it certainly isn't the most versatile sim racing wheel out there. One thing that drove me absolutely insane about using this wheel compared to a lot of the other wheels that I drive with day to day is the lack of 7-way switches. Now, obviously, being a wheel that's designed to match the real life F1 car, you know, we can't really be angry with them for not having those 7-way switches, but what it means in terms of functionality is you don't have an easy way to navigate through various different black box options inside the sim. You don't have an easy way to navigate through menus without grabbing a mouse or a keyboard. And those kinds of things, you know, to some people can be really important. I did genuinely find that to be very frustrating. So while it's not a criticism of the wheel, given you know, what this wheel is designed to be, it certainly is something that you want to consider very carefully if you are looking at spending this kind of money on a wheel. Now, you may have seen my post on Facebook and YouTube a couple of weeks ago with relation to rattling buttons. Now, I do want to make it very clear that the original wheel that we had, that early production wheel, did have much more rattling in the buttons than what we have on this final production version. They did make a couple of tweaks to the way they've designed the switches. There's some little foam inserts now which do limit that rattling quite significantly. The original wheel, even just touching the buttons and rattling them around with my finger, they were, you know, they just sounded very cheap and plasticky. This wheel now, nowhere near the same kind of level, and you know, you really do only notice it when you're over about 10 Newton meters. Definitely a big improvement over that first wheel that we had, in case you did see that post and you're wondering, but still not absolutely perfect. And they have told me that that is something that they are looking at improving in the future. And you might have heard I said earlier on in the video as well, these aren't the exact same push button switches that are found on the real life Formula One wheel, although the rotary switches are. So to summarize the experience overall, it definitely is a mixed bag. Look, this is an absolutely beautiful piece of sim racing hardware. Obviously, it is no easy task, especially for a small company like SimLab, to, you know, produce a wheel that is using CAD files from a real life Formula One team. The attention to detail that's required for that kind of licensing, and even just that example I said before about the button color not being quite right and having to reproduce all those buttons to make sure that it was absolutely perfect. Little attention to detail things like that are what make the difference in a piece of sim racing art like what we have on the table in front of us today. And for a small company to get a contract like that in the first place with a real life F1 team and then actually be able to deliver something like this, I think is pretty darn remarkable. And look, I mean, obviously this wheel isn't going to appeal to everybody, and I'm not going to sit here and say that everybody should aspire to own this wheel, because as a general sim racing wheel, the value for money just isn't there. There's plenty of other wheels that cost, you know, not much more than half the price of this that I think do a better job overall as a generic sim racing wheel. But that's not the reason why you're buying this wheel. Realistically, most people that are buying this wheel are going to be doing so because of what it is, not what it does. And I think it's really as simple as that. So look, for what it is, I think it does do a very good job. I certainly wouldn't recommend that everybody aspires to own one of these things. I would definitely recommend, you know, get yourself a round wheel, get yourself a D-shaped wheel, get yourself a more generic butterfly style wheel. And then if you're still not satisfied and you still want to start to get into those really sort of specialized wheels that suit one specific style of car, then that's really where the value is in this. That said, you know, you can drive GT3 cars. Ergonomically, it is absolutely fantastic. It's probably one of the best wheels, if not the best wheel I've used ergonomically, in terms of, you know, ease of reach of buttons and just how it feels in the hands, the weight, the diameter, all those things, absolutely great. But in terms of functionality, it just isn't as feature rich or as general purpose designed as a lot of those other wheels. And it really is just as simple as that, guys. So let us know what you guys think in the comments down below. And if you did actually buy one of these things, what would you be buying it for? Would you be using it as a general sim racing wheel? Would you be using it just specifically for a couple of different types of cars, or would you just be buying it as a piece of art? I think that's probably, you know, what this will end up being to me. I don't do a lot of Formula One style driving these days, so I can very easily see this being something that might end up on my mantelpiece or something like that. Now, of course, it is a very, very expensive piece of art, but at the end of the day, look, honestly, I'm just glad that somebody is doing stuff like this still. You know, the corporatization of sim racing is something that we probably need to talk about in more detail at some point. You know, a lot of these companies that are coming in now and, you know, being more competitive, it's great for us sim racers in terms of, you know, driving prices down and giving us more abundance of choice. But I do worry that, you know, the corporatization of sim racing is ultimately, you know, a bit of a race to the bottom. And I do worry that it will ultimately stifle innovation within the space as well, because if you can't make money off innovation, then, you know, there's not much point in doing it. So I do genuinely worry that, you know, the days of seeing these kinds of pieces of hardware may be numbered. So I think we really do need to celebrate that there's companies out there still making stuff like this. It doesn't suit everybody. It's not meant to suit everybody. For what it is, I think that it is absolutely awesome. So there you have it, guys. That is my very raw thoughts on this extremely niche but extremely awesome wheel. Really hope that today's video has at least been interesting for you, if not helped you out if you are looking at buying one of these. If it has, please do leave a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel as well so you don't miss out on future wheel reviews like this one, as well as other sim racing hardware reviews. We do have a whole bunch of sim racing wheels, including those Gomez wheels we looked at earlier in the pipeline, so you definitely don't want to miss out on those. And yeah, if you do decide you want to pick up one of these wheels or any other sim racing gear, check out the links down in the description below or hit up boostedmedia.net for all the details on that, including some discount codes. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.